Have all of you traveled around Africa in general? I know it's a very large continent, but the neighboring countries, for instance, I imagine you've been to.
Yeah.
Are there similar issues with the neighboring countries?
It's very interesting. We spoke about this just before the interview. It really is the case that when you travel up from South Africa into Africa, the northern border is the Limpopo River. The Limpopo River borders between South Africa and Zimbabwe, for example. But when you cross the Limpopo River going up north, you immediately feel safer.
Really?
So, and I've had the exact same experience. We had a sort of road trip once up through Botswana, Zambia, Malawi, back through Zimbabwe. And in each of those countries, including Zimbabwe, I felt safer than I do every day in South Africa. And you don't experience that you have to, look everywhere you go, you have to check your pockets or you have to look behind you, might stab you or whatever. So it was a sort of a personal experience, but I also observed it in speaking with people in those countries. Exactly the same story, like what you said. Is people say, like, I asked people in those countries, so are you going to South Africa? And many do. Many people immigrate downwards towards South Africa. And there's also xenophobic violence, so foreigners being attacked and killed. But the general sentiment I picked up in those countries was that they have this negative view of South Africa, and they think you have to be crazy to go to South Africa.
So there's actually, what is it? Is it 4 nations that border South Africa to the north?
Yeah, if you don't include Eswatini and Lesotho, which is sort of inside South Africa.
Within the borders there, yeah.
How do you pronounce it? Eswatini and Lesotho, how do you pronounce it?
Yeah, that's right.
Lesotho?
Lesotho, yeah.
Is crime similar in those areas that are seeming like largely inside of South Africa?
It's also high, but it's not as significant as in South Africa.
But those are like effectively like South Africa. Lesotho is a mountain kingdom, Eswatini was Swaziland. So the things that affect people in South Africa are really no different in those places.
Yeah.
It's once you go north to Angola and other countries and Mozambique that it becomes different. But I would argue that it's worth considering that South Africa is in the grip of a Marxist takeover.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And that what's really fueling the violence in South Africa is the Marxist communist globalist playbook, because that is where you see the real rupture. South Africa is critically important, both strategically. Look at where it's located, right? But look at it historically. Why does the Open Society have foundations outside of the United States of America? Where have they been for the longest? Mm-hmm. Where have they been most active? That's in South Africa. And why is that? If you look back at who settled South Africa and who was responsible for the trade there, when you go back in time, it leads you to 10 Downing Street and the Dutch East India Tea Company. And these are the same people. The Dutch East India Tea Company were the ships that took Darwin around the world. And the same people paid for Darwin's explorations and for him to create the theory of Darwinism are the same people that were heavily involved in trade out of South Africa. Where do the diamonds sit? They sit in the crown jewels.
Yeah. I heard that Elon Musk's
in the Tower of London.
I heard that Elon Musk's dad has an emerald mine.
I don't know about that. It could be.
No? That's what the left was accusing of. They said that his dad has an emerald mine in South Africa.
He bought one when Elon was 15. I think
is that what it is?
Official story.
I don't know.
Emeralds are not big in South Africa.
Yeah.
Diamonds are big.
Diamonds and platinum.
For these neighboring countries to the north, you mentioned you instantly feel safer, but is that true for all of them? You go to Namibia and you're just in it.
Botswana feels super stable. I
Really?
mean, there's a lot of South Africans that have moved there, wealthy South Africans. I stayed with a Boer family from Johannesburg. They lived in Francistown.
Botswana's great.
Yeah.
The most dangerous one I would say is Zimbabwe. Historically. Yeah. But then the north of Mozambique today, there's ISIS.
That's the infiltration of the Islamic.
There's ISIS activity
in Mozambique.
Nova.
Yep, in the northern.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's wild for me to looking at Lesotho. How does a nation exist in such a place? I mean, it's landlocked. It can't. How is it? Is it effectively just under the control of South Africa as far as anyone's concerned?
Not really. It's sort of people in South Africa just forget that Lesotho is there. It's
until remember there was the violence about 20 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah, a friend of mine was shot when he was covering that.
Wow.
And oh wow. And recently it was very funny in South Africa when President Trump spoke in was it the State of the Union? And he mentioned Lesotho, and he said, "There's this country, Lesotho, that no one has ever heard of. And why is USAID protecting the rights of Lesothans to be gay or something like that?" And it was something like that he mentioned. And it was very funny in South Africa because we all know about Lesotho. It's a good place to go on holiday. But it's sort of a mountainous, you mentioned.
It's a kingdom. It's
Yeah,
a tribal
exactly.
kingdom, and that's why it doesn't have any problem coexisting, because it's really that tribe. It's not in conflict with the tribes around it, and
Yes.
people just respect those. They respect those boundaries, almost like a reservation, but with more rights. If you know what I mean.
Is Maseru the biggest city?
I
That's
don't
the
know.
capital,
Maseru.
yeah.
Maseru?
Seru,
Yeah,
yeah,
Maseru.
that's the capital.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was set up as a protectorate by the British, right? And then it just never integrated because no one ever felt the need to.
Because it's always been peaceful.
It's
It's
just-
just
they're doing their
completely
thing.
peacefully coexist. But then there's occasional, tribal uprisings and whatever in internal
Mm-hmm.
conflict. Yeah, but it's pretty in Lesotho.
Wow.
Poor though, very poor.
So
Yes, very poor.
the reason I asked this question about the neighboring countries is that one of the things that often comes up in social media is the conversation about like Liberia, for instance. Liberia is modeled off of the U.S. Constitution verbatim, or identically. It's the U.S. that basically established it. And I think, what was it, like Abraham Lincoln wanted to repatriate former black slaves back into Africa or something to that effect?
Well, it was actually freedmen were a problem in the United States at the time, and so what happened is they needed to get rid of them because in the U.S. the politics of the day was that they didn't really know what to do with free men, and they didn't want to give them the rights that they had earned. So they created Liberia as a colony, well, not as a colony, but as a de facto colony to get rid of the freed slaves and say, look, we're going to give you your own country and your own land, get the hell out of here. And so it was the children of freed slaves that were shipped off to Liberia.
Liberia's not doing too well these days.
Yeah, it's doing very badly. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, they've had some genocides and exterminations and
So
They also had the
Famous
worst
warlords.
Ebola epidemic
If you
in
like,
history.
if
Yeah.
you zoom in on Liberia, you'll notice a lot of the county names. For example, the capital.
Monrovia.
Yeah, James Monroe, and it's like when the freed
Buchanan.
Yeah, the freed slaves came there, and they just set up the same system that oppressed them in America.
Well,
as
they
in
were the
set up-
descendants of free slaves, so they
Right.
were free men.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a legal distinction.
Do people outside of the United States generally refer to the Ivory Coast as Côte d'Ivoire, or how you
Côte
pronounce
d'Ivoire.
d'Ivoire? Is that
It's French.
Most people refer to it. They call it that.
Côte d'Ivoire.
yeah, I think most people say Ivory Coast, but
Yeah.
Côte d'Ivoire is very common also.
I've only ever heard Ivory Coast. I just thought it was interesting that Google decided to call it Côte d'Ivoire or whatever. But
you have
can
Sierra
I-
Leone was like the British version of Liberia as well, where they
Oh,
set
really?
it up to freemen from British colonies would go there.
well, so the reason I bring that up is online the conversation will go into this racial direction of if Liberia has the American Constitution in form of government, but has devolved this way, it must be race. But I ask you about these countries neighboring South Africa to the north. You say are much safer, but have I imagine the same ethnic composition, largely majority black. So there clearly is a political problem in South Africa that has resulted in this expansion and explosion of crime.
Yep.
I think you nailed it when you said it's the Marxist takeover.
It is.
What I end up seeing is these videos of largely Marxist ideas. These individuals are communists. They use the communist fist. And that is, I think, the easiest thing to notice in when you compare these nations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy you mentioned Liberia as an example because you can have two countries with the exact same constitution and one would be a great success and one would be a spectacular failure. And that's also the thing with South Africa. When the South African constitution was adopted in 1996 and the transition happened in 1994, it was globally celebrated as now it's going to be a free country and so forth. And the constitution was hailed as, people called it the most liberal, most democratic, most modern, most progressive constitution, all these buzzwords. But then the assumption was if you have a great constitution, you can just put it on a country and it would be a great country. But there are other factors that determine whether the country would be a success. And one of it is demographic makeup, not so much black or white, but just how homogenous is the country as opposed to how diverse is it. And a nation that is inhabited by a variety of nations naturally tends or leads to differences of opinion on matters of constitutionalism, how to interpret the constitution and so forth. That's one factor. Another factor is the fact that it's very big. It's a very big country, but it's very centralized. And then those in power in South Africa have been very actively. They have the strategy, they call it the National Democratic Revolution, which essentially means pretend that you are a liberal Democrat, but be a communist sort of behind the scenes and try and use multi-party liberal democracy as a way of promoting communism. And that's exactly what they have been doing. And they have publicly said so, that they write policy documents and they would explain, in order for us to implement our communist agenda in South Africa, we need to create the perception that we are actually liberals, and it's all written down in their policy documents. And yes, it's undoubtedly a big Marxist experiment, but it's also, as Lara said, sort of an open society experiment.
Wow. What makes you think, like, why did Liberia turn out the way that it did? Why is it failing? I mean, it has the same system that we have in the United States.
Well, I'm at risk to answer because I don't live there, but there's a Kenyan philosopher, Ali Mazrui, who wrote about this, who said that he wrote about the differences between Africa and the West, and he was obviously on the side of Africa, but he was very concerned about Africa not developing. And one thing he mentioned was that Africa took the wrong lessons from the West, in the sense that it took the consumerism, but it didn't take the entrepreneurial spirit from the West. Another concern, he says, is that what he's concerned about in Africa is that one of the big differences is people in the West see a problem and they want to fix it. And he says what he observes in Africa is people see a problem and then they live with it. And I think he mentioned the example of a roof that leaks. When you're in a house and your roof starts leaking, you can either fix it or you can put a bucket under the roof, under the leak. And he was sort of making the plea that don't put a bucket under the leak, fix the leak instead of just living with it.
What's winter like in South Africa?
Great.
But do you get a lot of snow?
No.
No snow.
In Lesotho, yes.
Is it?
We have wonderful
In
weather.
Lesotho, you get it in the mountains. Tim, one thing I want to say to you. So, I live in Texas, and there's a lot of families that inherit ranches in Texas, that inherit wealth. And what you find in a lot of those families with inherited wealth is that people don't do that well because things because they are given to them. So in a way, to me, Africa is a little bit like that. If you look at the Democratic Republic of Congo, they have the highest concentration of rare earth minerals of anywhere in the world. But yet, 80% of the population lives on less than $1 a day. Wow. So Africa was blessed when it was created as being, some of the richest soil. It is rich in so many ways. And as a result, it has been plundered. And when you look at countries like Nigeria, where the British went in and divided the country, where the country is divided Muslim North, Christian South, contrary to what you'll read online, the colonial powers often let those differences continue to exist because out of that conflict, it was easier to plunder resources. And as someone who covered many wars in Africa over the last 4 decades, what you will actually find in a lot of these wars, before the war is even over, Canadian companies, mining companies, British companies, American companies, French companies, Italian companies, they will be in there on the ground making their deals before anything is done. So what is driving a lot of these conflict is greed and control of natural resources.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Culture War podcast. We're live every Friday, 10 a.m. to noon, so subscribe and come hang out.